Let's describe these wood blocks. They are literally what we are describing, a wood block. They have a hole drilled in the middle, so we can put an identifying unit marker or identification piece in this little subset hole. Examples here. They're 5 inches in length, roughly 2.5 inches on the width, and about 3/4 of an inch deep, painted green. And notice I texture the top of the block, so it blends into my background of my game boards. That's a universal feature, of course, if you look at my game tables. The informational markers have a tendency to get blended into the tabletop, so they don't actually pronouncedly stand out when you take photographs of your armies. Now there's 2 sizes. We call the standard size block, and then there's a half size block. And the only real difference between the two is we use the larger blocks for groups or commands of more than 15 figures. In other words, it's a fairly substantial size force. If it's a small group of figures, like just maybe a regiment of cavalry or a single battalion of infantry, or it's a headquarters, like a corps headquarters or an army headquarters, or a couple of batteries of guns or something of that nature, we use the half-size blocks to represent those forces. On the opposite side to the half-size blocks, as you can see, we actually have an arrow marked on the block. And what this represents is an extension block. And you'll see this when I actually use the blocks on the table. But in a short case, it basically means a block occupies one grid square, a square foot, on the tabletop. And you can have an extension block in an adjacent square. And that basically represents that you've now put that command or that group or that division in both or the 2 squares. And that's what the extension arrows represent. I'll cover those more in depth when we actually get to the block movements. That's all it is. It's just a simple wood block, textured and terrain, shall we say, on one side. Identification marker built into the actual block. And this just identifies the block for a bookkeeping type purposes. For example, these are just simple counters, a little wood dowel cut piece with some form of identification on the front. In this case, it's the 2nd Prussian Cavalry. It doesn't necessarily represent the 2nd Prussian Cavalry Brigade, even though it could. It's just the number 2 marker. And there's infantry, and there's artillery, and train, and baggage, and things of that nature also. Whole collection of actual counters. And you just place them inside the blocks, as so, for an identification purpose. Now normally on the tabletop, unless the block can actually be seen and a visibility report given back to the opponent's side, these identification markers would actually be turned upside down. So you have no idea what that actually represents at this point in time, because all you see is the back side of the marker. But when the blocks get close enough, do you actually turn over and tell to the opponent that this is actually an infantry command, which has got infantry battalions built into it. These are some of the unit markers or identification markers which I made for the woodblock system. Basically, they're color-coded by nationality. So, for example, we have our Prussians, which are black. We have our Russians, which are green. Austrians are white. English should be red. French would be blue. Pretty much common stuff. Some of the minor powers have got some more of the exotic colors, like the Ottomans are in purple, Holland, orange, Sweden, yellow, and some of the ones which I don't show have got other colors too. Your core level markers are basically brown or white, pretty generic. But for the National Army markers, I would actually paint the flag of the actual individual country. So here we got English, Russia, Imperial French headquarters. A couple of the markers, small commands, examples. And last but least, the dummy markers. And remember, the dummy markers look just like all these other markers. When you put them in the wood blocks, you can't tell them apart from the others. So is that a real command, or is that a fake command? And last but least, we have examples again of the wood blocks where these markers actually reside in. And normally they're upside down, facing away, so you don't have the actual information which is written on the face of the marker, until you get close enough so that you can flip over the marker and they give that information to your opponent player.